All right, what's up, everybody? Welcome to the State of Wild, episode number 157, your semi-weekly YouTube podcast web series thingy. I don't know the line. Obviously, famous Wild Hearthstone streamer GetMeowth is not here. He's feeling a little bit under the weather. He probably took a look at the balance changes that we're going to be covering and maybe felt a little bit sick as a result. I don't know. I can't speak for him. How are you doing, though, Corb?
I'm doing all right. It's been a while since we've done a two-person pod. I can't remember the last time one of us skipped town. But Meowth, you know, like you said, I think that Reno Shaman nerf, we all know how much he really enjoyed that. I think that might have taken him out for the week.
Yeah, he does love his interactive decks, and as we all know, long-term viewers will know that there's nothing more interactive in his mind than Shudderwock Shaman. So.
Yeah, and it's so great because now we can just say the stuff and he can't say anything, which is kind of exactly like a Shudderwock Shaman experience.
Yeah, he should enjoy that. He should be used to it by now. Okay, so with all that, we did have a second wave of fairly small, minor balance changes. This is another data-only patch, so a lot of numbers shifting around, which gets people upset because they think it doesn't matter, but like, as we've discussed many times, number changes do matter in many cases. We'll see with some of these, though. This is largely targeted at standard and coming off the back of the World Championship that happened over the weekend. They did minor changes before that, more major changes now, so as not to interrupt the World Championships too much. But again, this is a standard targeted change, it being data only. There's never a chance that there are going to be some wild changes slipped in, or it was unlikely that there were going to be. So, first class that was hit is one that was a common ban in the World Championship because it is such a strong class, has strong decks going for it right now in Paladin. Actually had two Paladin cards hit, both of them AoE spells. They mentioned in the dev comment that they want Paladin to have AoE, but not necessarily at the power level that it is now. So, Keeper's Strength was 4 mana, that goes to 5. That is the buff a friendly minion, give it +2/+2 and deal its attack to all other minions. So that was kind of an awkward combination of a good board clear and good damage push, all in a single card, so probably doing a bit too much. Similarly, Prismatic Beam went from 7 mana to 8 mana. That is the one that deals 3 to all enemy minions, but it does cost less for each enemy minion. This is one that was often coming down for close to 0. With Showdown. But yeah, you probably play a bit more standard than me and have, people have been toying around with Holy Wrath Paladin in Wild for quite a bit now. How impactful do you feel like these two are for more generally as well as in Wild?
Yeah, I mean, generally, these are the super important changes. Paladin, it's been very, very strange. Paladin having this sort of access to AoE and how that has kind of dominated aggressive matchups, especially with the Showdown combo with Beam. Paladin usually is one of those classes where, like, if you get on board against the Paladin, you're kind of doing well. It's kind of what made Paladin so exploitable. Typically, like always, these aggro Paladin decks. So it's a really big deal. A small thing about Prismatic Beam that I definitely missed the first time I read it is that it used to go face as well. So now it doesn't go face. Which is kind of another big change for a deck like Holy Wrath Paladin because every damage point matters, right? If you're looking for that crucial 25. But yeah, these are big changes. Keeper Strength, probably less so than Beam for Wild. Like looking at Wild specifically, Beam was probably the better card. Beam being a card that actually scaled even better in Wild a lot of the time because of like even Shaman and Shadow Priest. Like the aggro decks in Wild would push so wide so fast, and so it wasn't that uncommon to get like a turn 3 or a turn 2 Beam just active like really easily. So it's a really big deal. But even Paladin stonks. Even Paladin, we can run Showdown Beam now. We can run Sea Giant with the Roffle. Not convincing you?
I mean, I'm a big believer in the even Paladin. I feel like it gets underplayed usually. That it could do something. Like it loses the Keeper Strength though, so clearly it can't survive this. But yeah, I definitely did miss the fact that Prismatic Beam doesn't go face anymore. That's a huge deal because it going face was just kind of like, I don't know, an extra slap in the face when you get it played against you, because you get your board cleared, which also means that the minions on board for the opponent get to go face a lot of the time, and then you take 3 damage on top of that, and it just it got me lethal in a lot of such situations when I would play the card. So I think it was kind of silly that it went face to begin with. So that's probably a good change. And
I do think one thing about the Paladin nerfs is that, because we saw them do order first, right? And then they ended up having to land on these. Like the very first patch, they could have done Beam or Keeper Strength or like Gardens of Grace is another card that was very complained about. I think Boogie Down was probably a hard one to change the numbers on and get right. Like that was a very tight one. But I think what we learned, right, is that like Order of the Court is, you're able to kind of build a strategy around it and make a deck very consistent. But once again in Hearthstone, it really seems like consistency is sort of something that is probably just like overvalued compared to just like good cards being good. And if you're good, you'll draw your good cards. And like whether you have Order in the Court or not doesn't really change the fact that like Beam is too powerful.
Yeah.
So yeah, I feel like we've seen similar things before with maybe even like Polkelt or just other types of changes where it's kind of been curbed at the whole deck strategy. But a lot of the time, the problem isn't the big strategy; it's just good cards having numbers on them that are wrong.
Right. You get in Hearthstone, you get a lot of your consistency from just like good deck building, right? There you have 30 cards. That's relatively small compared to a lot of other card games. You don't have like mana issues like in Magic the Gathering or resources that you need to accumulate in the form of cards. So it's like just building your deck to have good cards in it is a good way to improve consistency, and especially in a format with as deep as Wild, with as many good cards as there are in Wild. It's just like just run the good cards. And even at this stage in Standard right now, like you have as many sets as you're ever going to have in Standard. There are going to be enough good cards to fill things out that you don't have to necessarily rely on the deck manipulation as much. Okay, so what you're telling me is that Holy Wrath Paladin officially dead, no longer a tier 1 deck in Wild, and we all have to cry because even Shaman is going to pick up some slack in the robot uprising has returned.
Something like that. I think that's the story.
Close to it. I mean, that 1 mana on the Prismatic Beam, like going face against even Shaman, pretty irrelevant, but like that 1 mana could make a pretty big difference in a lot of circumstances.
Mm-hmm.
But Paladin was not the only class to get 2 cards hit. There was another set of synergistic cards in Druid. Dragon Druid specifically got 2 cards bumped in stats. This is Splish Splash Whelp, which is GetMeowth's favorite card to say. I'm stepping in for him as the host, so I had to struggle over that. It was solidarity. It wasn't just me not being able to say it. And Nest Matron, or Desert Nest Matron. Splish Splash loses an attack because it has no health to lose, and Desert Matron loses a point of health. That said, these are both cards that are included largely because of the text on the card in the battle cry, right? They're not really there to be big beaters. Desert Nest Matron does cheat some mana early that like could be relevant for tempo plays, especially in Standard. A lot of times in Wild, it can be used with an Aviana combo, so that's pretty irrelevant. And I mean, Splish Splash is still just a wild growth on a body, right? So how much are these going to actually change, move the needle a bit on Dragon Druid? Because I got to tell you, I saw a lot of them in duels today.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, aren't these just duels targeted changes that they kind of snuck in there? That was my understanding of how the duels meta is going right now.
No. These, when you're playing like 14 Splish Splash Whelps followed up by like 6 or 7 Phis, it doesn't matter what their stats are, you don't actually care. They did say that like Dragon Druid is a little bit higher or stronger than where they want it to be. I think that with these cards and their effects, they probably didn't need to be as close to like just evenly statted minions as they are, right? Like Wild Growth is one of the historically strong cards in all of Hearthstone history. Nest Matron is coming down for 0 mana. So like these are cards that just didn't need the stat lines that they had.
Yeah, I think like, well, obviously they could have pushed it to 3. They could have done that and maybe buffed it up to a 3 mana 3/2, or they could have done this, which is just like make the tempo a little bit weaker. They probably have good reason for like wanting to keep the wild growth card on too. Like whether it's a certain curve, like even this curve basically, like Whelp into Matron on 4, because the similar thing is true with Nest Matron. They could have pushed that up to 5 mana instead. Um, which I think for a gameplay perspective might have been like a nicer change, where like, the free body doesn't come down for 1 extra turn compared to a free body coming down with just 1 less health. Like that would have been a harsher nerf probably. But these are very, very small nudges. And I think that Druid is a deck that they're probably comfortable um being a little bit softer on, just because even though it is very strong right now, it is going to be very weak to super fast snowballing aggro, and a lot of that super fast snowballing aggro has been kept in check by Paladin. So, like, my expectation is that they're probably not too scared about Whelp and Druid in general being too powerful, while wanting to preserve the strong cards from this set. Because I mean, people like the dragons. I like the dragons. I think the dragons have probably been maybe the package that people have been most excited about and eager to play from the entire set so far.
Yeah, I think that like it is a relatively strong deck, both in wild and in standard, but it's not one that I hear a lot of complaints about outside of duels, obviously. But yeah, I'm not. Selfishly, I would have liked a harder touch, but there are things that like outside of these cards that I think would have done that for or is necessary for duel. So I wasn't like under any illusion that they're going to fix that format. But like I am in agreement that I think that maybe a mana increase to Nest Matron might have been more appropriate, just because like the Matron into the shoot man is just so much of a board swing for this deck that like it feels quite bad to play against in nearly any format. When it happens on curve, it's not a whole lot of fun, and delaying that by a turn at the very least feels like it would be a little bit more fun to play against. And it feels like just because if it weren't for the existence of these two cards in the set, the Matron and the 5/4 that shoots, I would be less inclined to care about the mana cost of the Nest Matron, but that interaction in particular is kind of gross.
Yeah, I mean, 5 mana would also be in line with previous 0-cost mid-sized minions that we've seen with things like Arcane Tyrant. There was also the 3/5 Taunt in Druid, I believe. I can't remember exactly what that was called. But yeah, like 0-cost stuff coming down on turn 5, very normal. But then again, when was the last time you saw an Arcane Tyrant?
Yeah.
So...
That's a fair point. That's a fair point. All right. This is the one. Next up, we have the nerf that is going to cause GetMeowth some pain. Staff of the Nine Frogs. That is the weapon that is generated by Dr. Holiday, the Reno Shaman card. Lost an attack. So it used to be a 2/9 weapon, which is absurd. It is now a 1/9 weapon, but it still summons the frog. That's intuitively that feels kind of like a big deal, because that you were kind of getting them in the face was the whole point of playing that on curve, right? Like the taunts allowed you to go facer because you can just rely on them to soak up the backswing rather than having to clear off the minions. And not having that damage go face feels like a pretty big oof. Like we saw something similar with Gariel in the past, where like that repetitive damage that's consistent turn after turn really starts to add up. So how is this card feeling now as a result of that change?
I think it's still pretty good, but I mean, they said it in the patch notes, I think, where they were like, yeah, there are some metrics where Doc Holiday might be the best card in the entire format. And I'm like, yeah, I mean, that's pretty realistic. I mean, it was one of the best cards in Wild as well, so it was pretty crazy. But I don't know, it's a really big deal, isn't it? Because usually Doc's a card that people are hard mulliganing for. Like, they're trying to slam it on 5 ASAP, and games typically going for like 9-10 turns. Like, I don't know, that's a lot of... That's a big nerf. That's like 5 damage, 6 damage off a card, which is sort of massive. I'm sure it'll still be good, because like the scaling of the frogs is still very tempo positive by the time you just get to like the second, and then by the third frog, you're doing kind of some wacky free tempo generation every turn. So But I don't know. We'll see. We'll see. I would be shocked if Doc Holiday is the quote unquote like best card in standard still. I'd be very, very surprised if it was looking better than Reno in deck specifically like Reno Shaman. But do I expect it to still be like on top 5 card in the deck? Yeah, probably. Like realistically, this is
Yeah,
still a good payoff.
yeah. I think of the nerf so far, this is probably the most impactful, but it's maybe one of the ones. This one, Prismatic Beam, but it's one of the ones that had like the enough distance to give in terms of its relative power level. Like you talked about being tempo positive and doing nutty things by like the 3rd or 4th frog, and I'm sitting here thinking to myself, when was the last time I saw the 4th frog? Because my opponent just kind of died to like that damage that I was accumulating from a 2-attack weapon. So yeah, probably brings it more in line with normal cards in Hearthstone.
Yeah.
All right, we did get a singular Rainbow Mage nerf, which is one that people have been clamoring for a while, pretty much since Sif was released in Standard. So Arcane Worm was the big hit. It's now a 1-mana 1/1 that adds an Arcane Bolt to your hand.
Which is fine. Like, I don't
Yeah.
know. There's a lot of cards in Hearthstone like 1/1s generate a thing. Arcane Worm was pretty damn good because like 1-drops at scale are always pretty awesome. Like, and this is a 1-drop that scaled great because the Arcane Bolt is decent in the early game, but it's also a really key combo enabler. So this was like just a very soft, very, very like soft nerf, I think. But they're obviously continue to be scared of Rainbow Mage because people love it so much, I suppose. like if Rainbow Mage is good, then it's gonna be 20% of the meta minimum. So they'd probably rather try and keep aiming for it to be right around that 50% like high tier 3 area because people are gonna play it regardless, probably.
Yeah, people like doing big numbers. And yeah, I think that the chip damage early is not inconsequential for that deck, or even something like maybe a Reno Quest Mage that might be running this. And it dies to a ping now. It trades less favorably into token minions. So on appearance, it might look like nothing, but it does something. Just maybe not as heavy-handed as people might have wanted for that particular deck, but that deck doesn't really exist in our format. So let's move on to Pyrotechnician, which is also not a card that exists really in our format, but it has been temporarily banned as a result of some silliness that was happening in Druid, of course, because a lot of neutral cards get murdered for the sake of Druid sins. So this is likely going to just be a rework, but because data only patch and short time frame before the holiday, they didn't really have a way to adjust this in time while still taking Fire Druid out of the current metagame. So probably a healthy change. I don't know. I never really encountered the deck, but it doesn't seem like it's one that people would enjoy queuing into if people start getting good at it.
Yeah, this continues to reinforce my idea that the Thaddeus change was kind of a mistake.
Yeah.
I keep like there keep being these little things that pop up that sort of abuse Thaddeus taking everything to 0. Where previously its old effect, while very, very silly, did only put things to 1. So it did mean that there was a certain point where things stopped. Because there are a few interactions, even in Wild, where I'm kind of like, is this like really a thing that should exist? I really don't like the Imprisoned Horror Thaddeus Seed Warlock. That would probably be in my like relatively top priority nerf list. And it's not like it's everywhere. I just think that for play pattern reasons, it's sort of a bit icky. And that kind of thing is going to probably keep popping up with the way Thaddeus exists right now. So, not the biggest shocker. Like, Thaddeus does rotate in March, presumably. Like, no spoilers on the next set, but we think it's March. And so like maybe Pyrotech gets to go back to normal after that, or maybe they unban it, or maybe they like whatever.
And maybe Thaddeus is just a good candidate for a revert like that. Maybe he's less dangerous at his old stat line. He never. I don't. Did he really do much in Wild?
Yeah, not in Wild. Like in Standard, he was a bigger deal, obviously, because the Chad Warlock putting cards to 1, but people thought the change would initially kill that deck, and it ended up being fine.
Yeah.
Like it was meant to be a nerf, and it really turned into sort of like a side grade that opened up these weird infinite possibilities, which I think is sort of the opposite of what they would really be aiming for when it comes to like a nerf like that.
Yeah. No, I definitely agree, but I guess that's a problem for future Blizzard. So, with the balance changes though, in addition to nerfs, there's also my favorite thing that happened. A lot of cards were buffed in the interim, largely in Priest and Rogue. Well, I guess a few classes: Priest, Rogue, Warlock, and Death Knight. All of which are not in the best spot right now in any format. Largely standard though. But so first and foremost, Elise Badlands Savior, still an 8-mana 5/5, which that's pretty limiting for the wild format. But if your deck has no duplicates, summon 5/5 copies of 4 random minions. So I believe this just bumped up the stat line to 5/5s instead of 4/4s. Doesn't seem like it's going to make the deck that much more fun to play or make this a good enough payoff to justify playing. Because in my experience, limited, mind you, playing this card, it lives and dies on whether or not it hits Amonthul or Faceless or the Behemoth. And I could not consistently get it to hit those cards, so it just always felt bad to play. It didn't matter what the stat lines are for those cards or anything else that I pulled out, it just felt bad to play.
Yeah, it's a card that needs pretty strong build around, but the problem is Highlander, you're running generic battlecry minions. Like they're so conflicting the strategies. Like if you're always hitting Amonthul and Yogg and I don't know, just like whatever the Colossal and Ziliax and stuff like that, then great. Like you have a very, very impactful card, but it's like, no, you need to run Reno, you need to run Raza, you need to run Zephyrus, you need to run like early game, like so it just doesn't really work for the Highlander deck. Which is kind of true for a lot of these Highlander payoffs. I think is that they kind of just like go in the deck or they don't. Like they don't really change the strategy of the Highlander archetypes very much. It seems like compared to something like Raza in the past. And so yeah, like this one is just probably not going to be good enough. Like we'll see. It's a lot of stats, but I mean, I don't know. I mean, it is a lot of stats, but again, like if there's no immediate board impact in terms of anything, then like what are you going to do? You need to be able to do something on the 8-mana play.
Yeah. Especially in wild, cards that come down for 8 mana or more need to have a more immediate impact than this is going to most of the time. Another Priest buff, which is probably my vote for the one most likely to get reverted, because this is a card that was in a World Champions lineup and like did relevant things for the deck. And it is Pip the Potent, who has dropped down from 4-mana 3/5 to a 3-mana 3/3. And of course, if you haven't seen her, or if you didn't watch the World Championship, she copies each 1-cost card in your hand. Scary for Naga Priest, potential for like that thirsty Shadow Priest type deck. And this is like a mana nerf for a card like this is huge, right? Because you're duplicating your hand and you're doing that earlier, so the next turn you just get to spam a bunch of 1-drops and you're like maintaining a hand advantage in the process while getting a huge tempo advantage. This is a pretty scary card, or in the context of it dropping down a mana when it was already like a playable card before.
Yeah, for sure. It was this is kind of like the Edwin candidate where now am I saying it's going to be as good as the Edwin to 3/3? Like no, I don't think so. But in terms of like the card that was sort of locked in, and then by the time they locked in, like 3 days later, they probably wouldn't have made that decision. This is that card because Naga Priest was a very, very late addition to the meta, basically. Like it happened basically at the exact moment they were locking in changes. And I think they definitely probably would have gone with something a little different had they been able to see Pocket Train and Meaty like perform the way they did in the World Championships. But it is what it is. Like, do I think Pip really breaks things open. Probably not. Like I think that Naga Priest was probably just very well positioned already as it was for standard. So like if it's good, it was probably gonna be good anyway. The question is mostly just like, okay, is it gonna be good or is it gonna be like tier 0 classic Hearthstone Christmas meta where there's like one super broken deck and we had that a couple of years in a row with like Thief Rogue stuff. So yeah, this is really good. I hadn't thought about the idea of it in like aggro priest. I guess you probably don't do that, but like you could probably build your deck around it because Mindseek is a really good card to duplicate thrifters and stuff like that. It's a lot of value for that, but probably not. But yeah, I was really disappointed when I went to go build Naga Priest in Wild, and then I just like poured it over the standard deck and was ready to make some changes, and then I saw that the clergy was banned, and I was like, oh. Like I can't do this. I can't play this. I want to play funnel cakes and clergy and do all that kind of stuff. And I was like, oh right, yeah, I totally forgot about that because they banned a core card. Very strange. I still don't know what they're doing with that. I don't think they know either.
I mean, you've got Northshire Cleric at least, right? Isn't like that can almost do a clergy impression if you and just throw in a wild pyro, you're fine.
Sure.
Yeah. Okay, so yeah, this is one that's a little bit spooky just because it wasn't even like a playable World Championship deck. It was a top performing World Championship deck. So we'll see. We'll see if there's any developments on that. The next one is a card that I had to check if it was real when it was announced. This is Invasive Shadeleaf. I can now officially tell you that this did exist before the buff. What it did is it cost 4 mana, deal 8 to an enemy minion, and then it does the bottle thing where you get a 1 mana with the excess. It now starts at 10, and you save the excess in a bottle. Yeah, again, news to me that this was a card to begin with. But I think this is probably that weird archetype that they were trying to buff the pip for, and then they just kind of did an oopsie with the Naga Priest, and this card is probably still not going to see play, even with a pip, like because those initial cards probably aren't going to see play.
Yeah, it's not great because it's still like 5 mana for 2 single target removals, which is like it's okay because like the following one, the 1-drop, is still like a big tempo swing play because you get to this like 1 mana kill thing. But like 5 mana's 2 single target removals, like it's not really tempo positive. We're thinking about it with like a Shadow of Death or something. Like it's not awesome. I probably would have expected this to maybe go to 3, and then maybe you change the number. Maybe you make it like 7 damage or 8. Maybe you can keep it at 8. I don't know, but I still don't think this is very good at 4. Probably.
No. Speaking of not very good, Rodden got a big buff here. His old was Death Rattle. Summon each minion who've played this game that didn't start in your deck. As a 6 mana 5/5. His new is 6 mana 5/5. Death Rattle. Summon each minion who've played this game that didn't start in your deck, but with taunt. So the taunt clearly ends it, right?
Yes. I thought this was the card you were talking about, which you didn't know if was real, because I forgot this card existed.
Oh no, of course I've played this card. Come on.
Oh, of course. Sorry.
Like, at least this card is fun. The Shadeleaf is just boring. But yeah, this is probably not going to move the needle on the play rate of Rodden. People that were playing it like me are going to continue playing it. People that are playing against it are going to continue ignoring
Killing
it.
You.
Yeah, and just killing you to the best of their ability anyway. So yeah, it's also just like you actually have to play the minions that he summons out too, which is a really big deal because you can't use like res effects to manipulate his pool. You can't do having to play is the big pain point for this card, not him dying, right?
Yeah, I was just reading that effect because, like, again, it's been a while since I've read Rodden, to be honest. And I was thinking that, like, it doesn't say like resummon each minion you summoned that didn't start in your deck. Like, yeah, that res pool effect would be very, very different. So
right, you pretty much just have creation protocol and like synchronized seance in order to make cards do something with this.
It's tough.
Yeah. Well, The good news is there were some rather frustrating cards that felt bad to play that did have that changed with this, including the Azerite Scorpion, which is the legendary excavate reward for Rogue, and Velorok Windblade. So both of these got pretty substantial like changes as a result of just how limiting they were to play in the past. So first of all, Velorok transforms now when you play one card from another class instead of 3, which was quite difficult to get online in any format, and probably just makes the card like worth running in your deck on purpose now. Like if you have a way to generate other classes cards, sure, throw a Velorok in there. It's fun. And then I think just as critically, the Azerite Scorpion was one of the worst feeling legendary rewards you could get from excavating, just because it didn't do anything until you cycled through the second round of fully excavating to the legendary treasure. So it wasn't until you got the second Azerite Scorpion that you actually could play the first Azerite Scorpion because everything costs full mana. But now the battle cry reads, get 4 random spells. They cost 1 less for each time you've excavated, but not less than 1. So you get some potential tempo advantage as a result of playing the first one relatively early. So things can't go below 1. If they start at 0, I think I saw that they stay at 0. But again, you don't have to just sit there, waiting around to continue excavating anymore. You can actually get a decent tempo swing from the first Azerite Scorpion.
Yeah, such a good change. Like, obviously makes the second Scorpion almost the exact same, like largely. But just sort of smoothing out that payoff. It kind of reminds me a little bit when they transitioned from quests to quest lines, where the intention was sort of to take away the big final reward being the only impactful thing, and you kind of want to reward players for sort of hitting each step. And just like doing, actually making progress in the game plan. So this is really great. Like, I love that you get a reward and you don't have to feel like, oh God, that was halfway done. Now I have to do it all over again. So that's great. The not less than 1 thing, I'm kind of a bit like, I don't know. I kind of like the cards that can go to 0. And I'm not really sure there was necessarily that much fear over like a graveyard Draka possibility. Like I suppose it would have been possible, but I'm trying to think of like a lot of the excavate cards kind of going in that package. Like, I'm not entirely sure, but I guess it is a lot. It would be a lot of discounted stuff, like especially with Shadow Step. So yeah, probably fair call.
I think the Shadow Step existence is probably one of the bigger, because getting an extra 4 potentially 0 mana cards could make a rather large difference in the size of your ghost or Draka.
Yeah, this change seems so good though. It does make me wonder. Like, I wonder if they ever play tested this or anything, because it seems so just elegant compared to what the released card was.
Right. So maybe an early iteration did do something similar. Potentially even did reduce down to 0, and then maybe that was why they like nerfed that part of it, and then now they're kind of coming back to some sort of middle ground with it. Obviously we can't know for sure, but yeah, I agree that it's like a clean, elegant change to make the card feel a lot better to play.
Yeah.
All right, well, one last rogue card. This one probably still feels very bad to play. It is Shell Game. That's the one that gives you an epic, rare, and common from another class. It's down from 3 mana to 2 mana. That's a lot of card generation, but like the problem in my experience is the cards that you get are just terrible. So it doesn't matter how much you pay for the Shell Game because the cards you get are terrible. So not sure that this one is going to make much of a difference, other than just like giving Burgle Rogue a way to burgle in standard for a bit.
Yeah, and I think that's all it needs, right? That it's not meant to be going in anything good. It's going in test decks, and I think this was probably the most obvious change. Like when they released the pictures and stuff, I was like, oh, so Shell Game to 2. Like there's literally nothing else you can do with this. And I think like almost every other card you could have made some argument in some other direction, but like this seems very clear. This seems like a really good just like default cost for this type of effect. Like I think, what do we have? We have Burgle What does the original Burgle do now? Is that
I think
2
it's
mana?
3 mana, grab 3 still.
Yeah, so like, let's put that to 2. Come on.
Yeah.
Let's just bump it up. Bump it up these random Thief Road cards. Why not?
I'm on board for that. I'm not going to argue against that. All right. Next up, we have Warlock, who did get a handful of things changed. First and foremost, their Barrel of Sludge. That was the thing that when you blow it up, would discard it, whatever, destroy it, play it. It deals 3 damage. Well, now it costs 3 mana, so you're never playing it from hand, and it deals 4 damage instead. So
Well, does it?
Sometimes. So allegedly, it deals 4 damage to the lowest health enemy. The problem is that it's currently bugged, so that when you destroy or discard it, it deals 3 still. I found this out the hard way, and it felt quite bad. That said, it does feel quite good when you play it alongside Popgar the Putrid now, who was buffed a little bit to continue offsetting the increase in cost. So he reduces them by 2 now instead of just 1. So they still come down for 1 when you play Popgar. That means you heal for a bit more because of the lifesteal on Popgar. That said, this wasn't an archetype in Wild. What was a card in Wild, though, was Furnace Fuel, which went down from 4 mana to 3 mana. That is the card that when this is played or discard or destroyed, draw 2 cards. There were some iterations of Questline Warlock that were trying to blow this up. How impactful is this change going to be for that type of deck?
I mean, the Wild discard Warlock, this is kind of a nerve. Like at least for the Fatigue Questline Warlock, because this was like Wing Welding Fuel. And apart from that, you'd always just discard it with Chamber. It doesn't really change anything. You just discard it with the Fracking. That doesn't really change anything. Like in a lot of ways, it's kind of like not impactful, except for Wing Welding specifically. So yeah, I mean, I don't know. Like when it comes to payoffs like this, you never actually in Wild ever want to play the card. You don't want to play an Arcane Intellect, and so it all just is irrelevant. It's just about the payoff effect, and that didn't change. So it's probably the tiny nerf, but you can also just make Wing Welding really good by just making double Hand of Gul'dan in the deck.
Right.
And not worrying about the 4 AoE, just like going a little bit more back in on the 6 AoE. So it's like very negligible, I think.
Yeah, so just maybe dump the Frackings or something like go back to what it was before the expansion.
The alternative was they could have kept it at 4 and made it draw 3 cards, and then we would have been cooking.
That's maybe a little bit overcooking for me.
Get out of the kitchen.
Yeah, no, thank you. No, thank you. That is not a deck that we need to increase the strength of in Wild. All right. A deck that we do need to increase the strength of, though, is Rainbow Death Knight. That is just kind of fallen flat since it was introduced for a wide variety of reasons. One of which is that you can't really spend corpses very efficiently in that rune set. So a lot of the rune spendy cards that you're happy to play are, 2 or 3 runes. The exception was maybe Ma and Pa, which has been buffed. They are given an extra attack, which in my experience probably isn't going to make it that likely to stick on board all that longer because it gets silenced or just removed. But it does trade down into a board a little bit more cleanly for whatever that's worth. And Corpsebride was also buffed to give the Risen Groom that it summons taunt. So Corpsebride, for those that haven't played it, because who has, you can spend up to 10 corpses to summon a Risen Groom. He now has taunt that have that much attack and health. So more than Rodden, I feel like this one is actually relevant because you're trying to make a tempo play here with this card. And the problem with it previously was people just kind of go over the top and ignore it because they are likely already ahead on board by nature of not playing Rainbow Death Knight. And so this would just kind of largely get ignored and you would die. Now it forces some sort of response. It probably has a hefty stat line that the opponent's not going to be excited about trading into. Probably still not enough to make the deck, a meta contender.
Probably not.
No.
Like, I think more and poor is probably quite good now.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's a big buff. Like, if the opponent has to trade into it, they probably have to trade like 2-3 things. So like, you kind of dealt like an extra 2-3 damage, which is kind of a big deal. Like, it's decent.
Yeah, it kind of gets that even if it dies, it kind of gets that +5 health anyway, just by nature of like removing the stuff on board.
Removing stuff. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So like, I think that helps a lot. But yeah, Corpsebride, I don't know. Like, we can table this again, like do a bigger convo potentially at some point about the rune system, because the rune system is, I think it's fair to say, like, objectively, it's like flopped super hard and it hasn't gone the direction that they intended. Does that mean it'll be like a flop for the future? Probably not. Like, I don't know. Like, they can definitely change some things and try and send things in a different direction. But I think it's very clear that, like, Death Knight, as initially released, they wanted to have the three rune decks, and that was the triple payoffs, and that was kind of how Death Knight was initially released in December. And then as we headed into rotation, they kind of wanted to open things up and bring in these many, like, combo rune archetypes, with Plague Death Knight being Frost and Unholy, and then Rainbow Death Knight being a thing, and then we had this like Blood and Unholy payoff and stuff, and none of it's worked. Like, it's all flopped. It's all just triple runes all the time, nothing but. And does it have to be that way? I don't know. Like, it's hard. Like, it's hard to support essentially 3 different archetypes at once with a card set that's the same as everyone else. Like, they only get the same amount of cards as everyone else, but they're kind of like trying to support 3 classes at once. So it's very complicated, very tricky, and I'm very interested to see what they do with Death Knight in the upcoming core set rotation, and like how they try and realign things, because right now it hasn't really been working out, I think.
Yeah, I think that's probably why we haven't seen a whole lot of Death Knight since it was first released, and it effectively got like multiple expansions worth of cards in order to compete with the other classes. Last Death Knight change, though, this will surely break Rainbow Death Knight wide open. Cene got basically all of its numbers changed. Deals 6 damage, summons 3 minions now, and they're 2/2s to start with. So you get kind of like a head start on your corpse spending. Still doesn't feel like a 10 mana card.
No, like, you could probably put this to 8 and maybe we're chilling. Yeah, I don't know. Give it tradable as well. I'm such a big fan of like what they did with Stranglethorn Heart, the Hunter Legendary. Like, if you're playing like a big build around payoff like this, give it tradable. Just make it not feel awful to draw this on 2 and think, wow, I'm holding this for 9 turns.
Yeah. No, I think that's a good solution, and would that still wouldn't make Rainbow Death Knight like a meta relevant deck, but it would make the card feel a lot better to not get stuck in hand. All right.
Yeah.
One last class in Warrior, getting some huge buffs because they needed them. Kazgaroth has +1 health. That is, of course, the Warrior Titan, which already gains health.
So boring. So boring. Out of any checks they could have made, I couldn't help but look at this one and go like, really?
Yeah. I think it's a fine card, but when you compare it to some of the other Titans, it's like, it's not exciting to play. It's a good card. People play it on purpose, but this doesn't make me more excited to play it, you're right.
Yeah, I mean, like, Kaz was already a card that was kind of 50-50 borderline in like Even Warrior. Like, it's fine, and now it probably just becomes like a core card in Even Warrior, like not one of the best, but like a card you wouldn't cut, because stats matter. Like, even just 1 health matters. It's not exciting by any means, but it matters.
Yeah. No, it certainly does, right? Because like a lot of times the way people interact with Titans is to remove them because they can't attack, so you have to attack into it, and maybe it doesn't die as much anymore. Next up, though, this one, if Kazgaroth didn't excite you, this one definitely will. Slagma the Slumbering. That is the 4 mana 16/16 Rush Taunt, but of course it goes dormant for 6 turns now instead of 8 turns, but still has the same Excavate to awaken 2 turns sooner. So basically you get a free Excavate out of this. All right, there's one more card that got buffed, and this is another one that I did not know existed until I accidentally generated it today. That is Horseshoe Slinger. As a 2 mana, it used to be a 3 mana 2/2. It's now a 2 mana 1/1 with the battle cry, deal 2 damage to a random enemy minion with quick draw and one of its neighbors.
Nice buff for Flint. That's
Yeah, that's how I generated it today. That's the only reason I know it's a card. That and Stick Up Stick Up can't even generate this, so no, only Flint. Which already got buffed. So basically, we're getting like a 2 mana buff to Flint now as a result of this change, because you just always generate this card every time, in my experience.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry for your experience.
Yeah, never heat wave when I'm begging for it, but this is almost a heat wave now. Okay. All right, so a lot of changes. Outside of Paladin and Shaman, though, not a whole lot of impact in our format, though, that I'm seeing. Maybe some, small incremental nerfs to the Druids will make it a little bit less popular, but I don't know. Like, how impactful do you feel these changes were for Wild in particular?
I mean, it's hard to say they're not impactful because, like, Holy Wrath Paladin is probably the highest win rate deck, and, like, that got nerfed, so that's kind of a big deal. Reno Shaman is the most popular deck. That got nerfed. That's a big deal. And Dragon Druid is probably the second or third most... Well, I forgot about Even Shaman. But whatever. Dragon Druid also up there in like top 3, like Reno Druids, whatever. And that got nerfed as well. So they're all like very gentle nudges. And they are impactful. But I think a lot of the time what we're looking for in Wild is for like nerfs and buffs to open up deck building possibilities. Like, which is kind of what we got with Order in the Court. Is that like that was a nerf that sort of opened up the possibility of Holy Wrath Paladin more to people. And in terms of that, I don't think we really got a ton of that. We did get the Even Paladin. I'm sure like that might be something that people give a try now. And now that we have like Prismatic Beam and Even Paladin, like that's kind of noteworthy. But a lot of the buffs themselves, looking more at the buffs rather than the nerfs, the buffs don't really excite me very much. I'm kind of flipping through and I'm like, what do I actually want to do with any of this? I think Pip the Potent is probably the one that comes to mind as like a card that can be very good in potentially more like board-centric-y stuff, like Shadow, probably not, but like maybe like Inner Fire type stuff, maybe like the Naga Priest, maybe we can port it over into Wild, even without the damn clergy that I want to play with so bad. But there could also be like the combo stuff, the Burn Priest, the Phantasm, and play a whole bunch of spells with Radiant Elemental. And in a combo deck like that, Pip coming down 1 turn earlier, and that's a big deal. So we'll see. Especially as well because, like, I don't know, I don't know, just like the ability for the combo cards to come down, like even with Insight, like going down to 1 mana, like there might be some funky stuff where you can do where you could actually generate Pip into generating Pip. I'm not exactly sure how that would look, but it's a possibility. As long as you have like 2 Pips in hand that cost 1 mana. So, but yeah, I don't know. I think Pip's the exciting one, but overall, big patch. Not that into it. Not that into what it opens up. Anyway, Roffle, your turn.
Yeah, I think that I'm largely in agreement. I'm a little bit excited about the rogue stuff just because it like makes cards that felt bad to play a little bit less bad to play. Like they're still going to feel bad to play because you just die when you play them. But like in the rare instance where you don't, it's going to feel pretty good, right? So it makes them cards that are, I don't know, like actually worth caring about. It feels like, and so that's a nice change. But yeah, on the whole, not the most inspiring patch in terms, but I think that was intentional. I think they wanted to go light touch across the board. I think they're relatively happy with how the metagame is started to shake out, at least in standard. And so I don't know. I also think that it being a data only patch, I think they're still waiting to see how things develop and probably have a lighter or larger patch after the holidays are over, when they have, you know, more time to discuss it, as well as set up like some a more major set of changes. So hopefully that that does more things, but like, I don't know, that would, major changes would mean that things are pretty broken over the course of the holiday to justify major changes taking place, you know, after the holiday. So that might not be the best case scenario either.
Yeah, I mean, this is a relatively quote unquote safe patch, and we still ended up with Pip the Potent and Naga Priest. So it's
Yeah.
like, look, this is like as safe as they can go, sort of. And we're still running a lot of risk. So if they make something bigger, then, you know, there's more risk. There's also a very good chance that like this could just be the last patch that we get before the mini set.
Yeah.
I don't know anything, but like the March 11 date has been thrown around a lot for like the upcoming expansion based on when, I think it's like
The pre-order stops being on sale or something like
yeah,
that.
yeah, exactly, the pre-order. I think this also might be something to do with like the rewards track or
Mhm.
something. I'm not sure. It
That's
also lines up with Hearthstone's like 10-year anniversary, I believe, of like official release. So there's a lot of stuff that's kind of building up to the idea of like a early mid-March release, and that means that the mini set might be a little bit earlier than we expect. Like we never really know. The mini set isn't always super consistent in terms of exactly bang on 2 months, but it wouldn't shock me if like 20th of Jan or something was maybe the date that we might be circling as a like hypothetical, which means that by the time the team comes back from Christmas and stuff, maybe we just kind of ride it out until whenever the next mini set is. Because I think 20th of Jan was right around when like Galakrond's Awakening mini set was announced or was released. So you know, we have that kind of date in, you know, in our history. So there you go. Yeah, we'll see.
All right. Well, yeah, I feel like that's a good place to leave things. Maybe set some expectations for what may or may not happen in the coming year. That also means that things are going to be a little bit slow in terms of news, very likely moving forward. So for us, that means podcasts maybe a little bit, you know, slower cadence until the mini set gets announced and revealed, and then we'll go back into reveal season. But I do want to thank you all for listening to the end. As usual, make sure that if you got to this point, to wish GetMeowth well in the comments below. And Corb, let the people know where they can find you trying to break Pip the Potent.
Yeah, guys, you can find me at twitch.tv/Corbett or find me on Twitter and YouTube at Corbettgames.
Yeah, and you can find me on Twitch and YouTube at Roffle, probably raging at the Dragon Druids that I keep queuing into while I'm trying to get duels runs going. So, thanks again for watching, everybody, and we'll see you again next time.